I'm here with Ann-Margaret Gonzalez. Ann-Margaret, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ann-Margaret Gonzalez, and I work as the lead public affairs specialist at the Edwards Aquifer Authority here in San Antonio, Texas. And a little bit about what I do, I manage our public relations efforts. So anything from public affairs type work, media relations, working with our social media management, and working with like local publications to kind of get our message out there about what the Edwards Aquifer is and what the Edwards Aquifer Authority does to protect the Edwards Aquifer.
Awesome. That sounds like a really fun job. Are there any frameworks or methodologies of thinking about what you do in public relations that come to mind?
Yes, I would say, practical application wise, the public information model, the media relation type things, the disseminating information through press releases and social media of the things that we do. So it's more of that one-way communication of, getting our messages out there, whether it be when we're in critical period management. So the aquifer will sometimes, or when we're experiencing drought, the aquifer will get very low. So we have to communicate to our audiences, permit holders, and people throughout the community about the aquifer levels so that hopefully water conservation happens.
That makes sense. And what a big job to be able to communicate something so important as the resource that we all depend on, right? Are there any challenges in communicating and getting the message out and getting people to actually change behavior and save water when we're at that point?
So I've worked at the Edwards Aquifer Authority for almost 10 years now. And when I first started, I was in a different role, more of community outreach. But I've been a part of the communications and development team since I've been working here. And the things that I've noticed is that people have become more aware and have more of a draw to environmental type communications. I feel like, even during the pandemic, I think when we were all like, kind of in our houses and things, people were ready to get out. They wanted to do things. And a lot of what we do at the Edwards Aquifer is environmental communication. So it's kind of raising awareness, but also seeing if people will change their behavior and conserve water. So for the Edwards Aquifer Authority, we manage permits and permit holders. So this, for example, the San Antonio water system is one of our largest permit holders, and they communicate those messages to their audiences about watering on certain days when we're in drought and things of that nature. But we also like to promote water conservation among the public. And something else that we like to promote too is something big that we're doing now is soil restoration and planting native and making sure that you're not planting exotic species, because if the soil is eroding away, then the water is not infiltrating into the aquifer.
So because that system is connected to the aquifer, you're making sure that people are planting things that help to soak up the water and get it into the aquifer underground.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. Keep the soil there, the microbiomes, like the fungus and everything that's in the soil. It's good for the system as a whole.
Gotcha. So whenever you're trying to get people to adopt these kinds of behaviors, are there any approaches that seem more fruitful than others?
Yes, I would say, my position is more of like the traditional communications things, like, press releases to the express news, to local news stations. More of that type of information is getting out there. And I would say when we are in drought, which we are now, actually to the Edwards Aquifer system and the things that the kind of communication and the news outlets are actually on board with it, it's unlike anywhere else. They're reporting those aquifer conditions and the critical period stages of drought that we're in. So I would say traditional media has served us very well. They're very quick to want interviews with some of our staff and some of our, geochemists and hydrogeologists and aquifer experts on the health and the state of the aquifer. We kind of have all eyes on us during those times, but also we like to reassure the public too, because our authority was created to manage drought. It's what we do, and it's what we do well. So press releases to media alerts for different types of things, especially when we're in the thick of drought. Those types of things have been very helpful and fruitful in us getting our messaging out there. We opened up an education outreach center last year, and that's another driving force to kind of educating people and communicating to them the importance of the aquifer. So at any kind of age level and any demographic, that education center is a hub for people to learn about the aquifer. And we've had people from, we've had political officials come and learn about the aquifer. We've had master naturalists all the way to like students and little kids coming and learning about the aquifer at the center.
That's fantastic. And so many different initiatives there too with the education center. And before we talk about the education center though, can you tell me a little bit about the things that make a press release effective? Because we have people writing press releases, some for the first time, and you've done so many press releases by now. So I'm wondering if you have some tips and tricks for making a press release that really will get into the minds of our journalists who are working hard to do their jobs.
Yes, I would say it's kind of the age-old tale of, if you can put figures and numbers in there, I think that's very impactful. And, the hook, line, and sinker kind of thing, like the title of your press release going to really engage and draw people in to want to mention that in the nightly news or mention that in the newspaper. Those type of things seem very, when it comes to environmental communications and my work specifically, those types of things have been driving forces for people. And then the way in which you share those press releases too, I think, having a strong communication line between you and those news sources. So I have people from the Express News to KSAT to Ken's that I work with and have worked with directly and have built that kind of communication relationship. So I take it a step further. Like I will disseminate my press release across and do an e-blast, but then I will also follow up with them via text message or kind of a more personalized email, just kind of drawing back on the information and seeing if there's any collaboration we can do, any interviews they would like to get from our staff to kind of further convey what the press release. Maybe, the press release is great and it's something that they can use and it's a quick way to get information out, but sometimes they want to take it a step further and, they're all trying to kind of compete against each other to who can have the most intel information and who can have the most current up-to-date information. So interviews are always welcome by them and they kind of draw towards that.
So you take the press release as a tool for building a relationship, but it sounds like it's surface level. Is the press release like the thing that helps you get into the door and have those kinds of relationships? Or is it something that is different from that? Like it's something that's more, it's just a blast and people will skim it. But the relationship, those one-on-ones that you have are far more contextually rich, right?
Oh, I would definitely say so. And I think too, it's all about establishing, awareness, but also, you're almost kind of creating these crusaders, like these subject matter experts among these different news sources and news outlets. Sometimes with that comes teaching them a little bit about what even the aquifer is, because it's like they can take what we have and kind of say it and put it out there. But if they really know about it, I've come to find that they become passionate about it. Like they want to do more stories because there's so many levels to what we do as an agency that they're like, oh, I can see how that can tie in here. And so they become like, kind of, I guess, like they want to know more. They themselves are curious and they're like, oh, this would be something that I think I could see someone asking or like the public wanting to know more about.
Are there things that you do to help pique that curiosity? Because I know reporters are naturally curious. They wouldn't be reporters otherwise. But what are you doing to help pique that curiosity? And what things do you have in your mind to help pitch a story whenever it's time?
So I rely on our experts. So it's like, I can get at the communications level and kind of, I've been doing this for a little while and I'm very passionate about environmental communication. So it's like, I am like a science enthusiast. Like, don't have necessarily a science background, although that's something that I eventually want to pursue and do. But I will work with, I have strong relationships that I've built with inside the agency all across the various departments. We have an agency of about 100 people. And I have strong connections and relationships with the executive directors all the way down to the boots on the ground people that are out in the field. So I have a pulse, and I keep a pulse on kind of current events, current happenings in the various different departments. So for example, like we have a habitat conservation plan, and a lot of work they do is to protect the threatened and endangered species that rely on the Edwards Aquifer. So they have conservation measures. So I will pitch to reporters, like, we can go out to Comel, we can go out to Landa Park and go. You can see some of the work happening, like scuba divers counting salamanders under rocks, and you can kind of work. And then I will work with the executive director of that department. We'll meet the reporter out there. And most of the time they're eager. They're like, we get to get out of the office. Most of the time they're getting out of the office, but they're maybe going to like car accidents, or, like they're going to report on things that are not necessary. They're like harder things to kind of communicate. And so this is more like a feel good, like it's more of like neutral communication, right? Like anyone wants to know like how things are doing, how the aquifer is doing, and what we're doing to protect it.
You mentioned pitching. What are some of the things that you have in your mind as a checklist for an effective pitch?
One of kind of the facets of pitching that I will start out with is identifying probably internally what types of things that we are going to pitch. So like I said, having a pulse in the different departments on what the current topics are, or the current kind of news is within those different realms. So for example, we had something called the Texas Mesonet, the 100th installation of weather stations, and it's a part of the Texas Mesonet. It's a part of the Texas Water Development Board. So this was going to happen at our field research park. And part of what I did is I will work with, this was a relationship and a collaborative effort. So the station was going to be on our field research park, but the network is Texas Water Development Board. So kind of to give you an idea, they're based out of Austin. And so they relied heavily on me to get the media presence there, since we know the media around here. And something that has been proven successful is media alerts. So alerting the media in advance of whatever you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do has proven to be successful. A lot of the times they're like, I need a story by the end of the day, or like, can you all do this interview at such and such time because my deadline is 5 p.m. So when they kind of have an idea of it in advance, they'll work with their editors and they'll work with their managers and let them know, like, on this day, this media event is happening. And so for the Texas Mesonet thing at the field research park, I was able to send that media alert. They have my direct lines of communication. I overextend, so I'm like, any questions, text me, email me, call me. I'm there for you if you need anything. And also providing them a background. So like within the media alert, giving them enough information that they can kind of do some skimming and some research ahead of time and be like, okay, this fits here. We can use this. So not being so vague, but also like throwing those figures out there, like the 100th installation. And then of course, when you hear Texas Water Development Board, you hear Austin, people are like, oh, like that's happening here. So that for that specific instance, the event was very successful. We had almost coverage in every news kind of outlet. So from print to online news sources, and to even like televised news sources too. We had an array of people there at that event.
That event had so many different dimensions to that campaign, right? So you had press releases. What are some of the other dimensions that you had to put into making that event like a success?
Yes. So it would be the media alert, press release. We had a videographer, a photographer there capturing that information. I also work closely with are in our internal experts. So I was kind of the manager behind the scenes of like, they need an interview about this. Can you go over here? And then, grabbing someone else and saying, okay, while they're doing that interview, can you go ahead and handle this interview? So it was a lot of prepping in advance, collaborating with the Texas Water Development Board, collaborating internally with the communications and development team. And then day of, like, you can plan all you want, but to me, kind of advice that probably is also just like always given is being as flexible as you can be, and knowing that if you think it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So just be prepared for anything and everything. And those types of nuances happened throughout that event, but it still ended up being successful. So at the end of the day, it achieved what we wanted it to achieve. And it gets to that, the earned media, these are things that we've done it in the past where we've paid for spots on television and things like that, but this is organic, earned on its own. So those are always things that we're also looking forward to.
So much work goes into that event. When you were talking about the experts and the subject matter experts, are you coaching them at all on talking points or how to interact with the media, or have you already done that and that's old news now?
We have had multiple types of trainings that we've had, communication trainings where we've done in-house kind of seminars where we pick spokespeople essentially for different experts in different fields. So we have like aquifer science, or we have regulatory affairs, or we have habitat conservation plan. So in those different little niche areas, we identify an expert. Most of the time it tends to be the executive directors, because that they have that high level overarching. And so they're seasoned, they know what to do. But when we have to call on some of their team, we have done training sessions, and those proved helpful. I also think too, you have different personalities and different ways of communicating too. So as much as you would want someone, you can train them up as much as you want, but they're going to always fall back on their way of communicating. So what I've also found is the more we call on these people to do it time and time again, they've gotten more comfortable, and they understand what a reporter is looking for.
Because you've worked with them before, and because you're giving them the reps, you're giving them the experience every time a reporter calls to say, hey,
Yes.
You're my go-to on this, here you go. So they feel comfortable by now, it sounds like.
Yes.
Fantastic. Are there any other elements of the pitch that really help you get on board? Maybe like social media. Is social media an important part of that pitching process? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Oh, absolutely. So social media, the Edwards Aquifer Authority tends to have a larger audience and a larger following. We have an education outreach center, and then we have a conservancy, which I social media manage all of those efforts. But a lot of the ways in which we communicate with our target audiences and with with reporters and journalists and those things of that nature, they have eyes on our stuff, because they'll even say, hey, we saw you post about this, whether it be aquifer conditions, sharing the press release not only with them via email and an e-blast, but through social media, so the public can be aware of what we're going through. Social media has proven to always be helpful. It's like the more ways you can, kind of bombard people's eyes with what you're trying to communicate and convey, the more they're like, okay, this matters. And I would also say within social media, engagement and impressions that you get from the various different ways that you communicate tend to be helpful in kind of furthering and pushing the message, because people will share things, people will like it, things could go viral, those types of things,
Yeah. So engagement and views, I know that a lot of creators struggle to achieve the numbers that they want in terms of views and engagement. I wonder if you have any advice for what you're looking for before you hit that post button, before you're letting a reporter know as the target audience that you posted something of importance. Are there certain things in your mind that you think, ooh, these are the top things that I need to remember before I hit that post button, regardless of platform?
Yeah, I would say just always making sure that, it's different ways of communicating. So, of course, on social, you're trying to catch people's attention. You're not trying to be necessarily just factual. You're also trying to create a buzz as to why someone should pay attention and find something important. So it's those hooks that you have in there. It's those figures again, compelling content. So if it's a video clip or if it's a photo, professional photos are nice. Also, for video clips, if it's succinct and to the point and kind of getting, if it can capture someone's attention in like a 30-second time frame, and then to me, I'm like, you've succeeded in communicating what you want to communicate. I can note various examples of things. So, like at our field research park, and then our education outreach center, um, it's those moments in which you can kind of change people's perception of like what they see on their feed. You see pictures, you see selfies, you see things, but like what's something new and unique that people aren't doing, and that tends to get more views, that tends to get more likes.
Ooh, so stop the scroll, right? How do you stop the
Yes.
scroll? How do you break that? Because there's so much noise out there. And not just in one platform, but in all the platforms. They're all competing for our attention and time. And it's so precious to get past that. What are some of those things that you see happening that are successful?
Um, I would say, and it also like, the voice of your brand. So, the Edwards Aquifer Authority tends to be a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more, I would almost say, if you've seen like Texas Parks and Wildlife and US Fish and Wildlife, they have been doing kind of those catchy, um, kind of witty posts that have tended to go viral. So we kind of model our things after kind of, it's like reading the room essentially, like what's trending, what's now, what can we jump on? I know, was it Christmas, around Christmas, I posted about, you know, the Texas blind salamander has these external external gills that are red. So like Christmas, and then the Texas wild rice, which is another endangered species. It's the only plant species that's on our list. It grows in San Marcos, and it's like willowy and billows in the water in the San Marcos River. So I posted someone on a kayak, and I put a little Santa hat on him, and we got so many shares and so many likes, and people were like, "Oh, that's clever, that's cute." But I'm also communicating the importance of why it's important to protect these species, and a little nugget of information as to like a little snapshot of what we do at our agency. So that's kind of an example. It's like it's staying current, staying trendy, or even being a trendsetter. It's like, you can do those things if you think creatively, right? Like being intentional, not just posting just to post.
Wonderful. And are there things that are specific to the platform? Are these rules that we can apply to any platform? What platforms do you use a lot? And what works on what platform in your experience?
Yes. So we use Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Nextdoor, and you have the different types of audiences. Like LinkedIn tends to be, the professionals looking for information. Maybe it's partners in the community that we have. So that information that we post there is maybe more about job openings or what our agency has done um, in the community. Uh, to Facebook, it's more kind of the OGs of social media who have used social media for a while, tend to be on Facebook. TikTok is one of the newest platforms that we started using. So that is like the very trending kind of stuff, and jumping on those trends that people have out there. TikTok is like the number one place to do that. Instagram videos tend to do better on Instagram. Um, so it's putting the content to which you can kind of be successful in that certain platform out there. So we have done this where we cross we cross promote on different platforms the same kind of content, but you will see how one outlet fares better than another outlet because it's meant for, like, something's meant for TikTok and it's not necessarily meant for Facebook. So I think something, a good tool to use is, you know, always kind of being immersed in the social media outlets with which you're managing and keeping a pulse on what is current and what is newsworthy.
That makes sense. And I know you mentioned trends and seasonal trends and what's happening trends and reading the room and utility too, right? What are some other like big things that transcend platforms? We know utility, like this is useful information. We know trends and holidays and paying attention to those sorts of things is important. What are the other things on that list are important regardless of the platform you're posting to?
They also too, you know, for the Edwards Aquifer Authority, we have various different audiences too. We have irrigators out west. We have, you know, more metropolitan like cities, like we have, you know, the city of San Antonio, more urbanized areas. And then you also have like the Springs communities in Comal and San Marcos, more of like the nature people, the environmentalists, you know, and so, and everything in between. So I think also too, when you're communicating to people on these various social media outlets, it's like you want to communicate the message with which you're trying to focus or communicate to a certain target audience. So like irrigators out west, we will do traditional communications and marketing through postcards and mail outs, but we will also post on social for maybe the younger generations that live in those areas. So for example, we have permit holders that are more traditional, like they get mail and they look at what we're trying to communicate via mail. They're older generations, they're not on social. Then you also have people who inherit land and become a permit holder, you know, through their parents' permit or something. And so they might throw something away, you know. So social media is a way in which we just make sure that we're covering all of our bases and getting those good lines of communication out to people. So I would say, you know, making sure that like what you're sharing is compelling, and you can't be everything to everyone. So it's like kind of assessing and understanding, you know, is this message going to be well received in this type of way? Of course, like for something serious as like drought and critical period management, I'm not going to have someone like doing some kind of trendy kind of dance or something talking about drought. Like it's just like kind of like the read the room thing. Like that would absolutely not fly, you know?
And you just gave us a really rich description of the importance of understanding your audience. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because you're talking about such different generations, even on social media, not just on direct mail, but there's so many different generations that you're trying to appeal to. It just seems like a really difficult thing to have so many audiences instead of just one specific narrow audience, which is what a lot of
Yes.
companies have the advantage or disadvantage of,
True.
right? So
True.
so can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. I would say it's been uh a learning curve for me. Like it's something that I've had to learn since I've been here. Um, you have, you have on my team specifically, we have our education department. So they cater to the K through 12 and some college type courses. So they're trying to communicate our message and communicate stuff to the younger generations so that they become passionate about things. We have community outreach. So we're going to events within the community, from Uvalde all the way to Hayes counties, and kind of, tabling, communicating with people, asking them to follow us on social, do surveys, because there's only so much time you can have. We can't be everywhere and anywhere. Our team is small too, so we try to do the best we can with those avenues. And then social has been something that's been a driving force in the way that we market at our agency and communicate with people, because we can't always have the boots on the ground. We can't have someone at an event every day communicating what we're trying to get out there. So social media has proven very helpful in those types of things. We also have our science community where it's that high level, kind of they're setting the precedence for cutting edge research for the aquifer. Like, we have a lot of well-known scientists, so they're doing research, and sometimes our messaging, like, for example, I want to share something amazing that's happening at the field research park. They're doing something called a berm and swale project. So they're building these berm and swales to help that infiltration of water in the aquifer and help it stay within the land and not run off and erode things and create, pollution and those types of things. So it's also bringing that down to a level with which people can understand and appreciate it. So there's various different facets. Like, if I'm going to communicate something like that to our social media audiences across generations, you have to do it at a certain level to which people can understand and appreciate it.
And working with those subject matter experts, again, who you've worked with for a long time now, to make sure that they're hitting the points that will resonate the most with such a diverse audience. Can you speak a little bit to that and how that conversation might go? Have you ever had a subject matter expert go one direction? You're like, wait. We need these talking points, not those talking points on this specific kind of project, because our audience is short form video, right?
Yes, we definitely have. So I have my go-to people. I have the people with which, like, it's also me kind of refining the information that they give too, because sometimes they're so busy that I'm trying to get this message out, and I'm just like, can you just give it to me, and then I'll work on it. Like, I'll get it to where it needs to be so that it can be successful on social. But we do have people internally that we have some professors we have a UT professor. We have people who have spoken a lot and really worked with our team, whether they do interviews or I have a close relationship with them, to where they understand it and they get it. So it becomes kind of second nature to them. And, but a lot of the times I'm like, it's me getting the information and then kind of really finessing it to do what it needs to do, because they're busy. And I'm just like, sometimes I'm probably just like, they're like, okay, Ann-Margaret again. Ann-Margaret's coming to us again. Like, here's the information that you need. And then I'll always be sure to come back to them and say, okay, this is what I have deduced from what you've given me, and this is what I feel like I can use. I will always fact check it and just recheck it with them. And that's always been proven helpful. And they're thankful that they're thankful for that too, because at the end of the day, we want to get accurate information out there. So I think it's also to knowing who to go to, and knowing the people that necessarily maybe don't really get it. Like, there's just some people that don't get it, and they're like, I'm over here doing an aquifer model, or I'm over here doing this research. Like, whatever you're doing is just not in line with what I need to be doing right now.
That sounds like a hard challenge too.
Yes.
And going back to, you're the translator for, again, these diverse audiences of some very complicated scientific material in some cases. Do you have some things in your mind? I imagine being clear is at the top of the list. What else is on that list as you're taking these complex ideas that might be overly scientific and translating them for a more general audience?
Yes, I would say definitely being clear. Facts and figures help. Infographics have proven helpful in some of the things that we're doing. Demonstrations. So, if we have the opportunity to go and capture video of people in the field, I can recall recently, we have someone who has the logging van. It's like this it's this van that you can't miss at our agency, and it's well known. So we were doing a short form video with Rob, and he was kind of, he could talk about what he does, but you have to show it. Like, he's going to be talking about these probes and these cameras and these things. Like, no one's going to know. So visualizing visual elements for people to see just always prove to be successful when communicating something that might be more difficult for people to understand. People are like, oh, I get it. And, what comes to mind too is like, well, a well. People think, oh, a wishing well. That's what people tend to think when they think of a well. And you say, oh, people have wells throughout our jurisdiction. Unless you grew up with a well, you probably think of a well a certain way. Just like, very unassuming. It can be abandoned, and there's a whole story for that. But so like you just never know what people don't know. So also, visual elements have proven very successful with environmental science communication, that I have experienced so far.
Awesome. So visualization, data, making sure that you have facts and figures, making sure that you're clear and concise. What about the emotional element? What about the storytelling? Can you speak a little bit to storytelling in these kinds of projects?
Yes, absolutely. So when I think of storytelling, what comes to mind is, so for example, years ago, we had a strong push for, this kind of goes back to the well thing. It was an initiative to identify abandoned and deteriorated wells throughout our jurisdiction. You'd be surprised how many people don't know what a well is and don't realize that when they buy a piece of property, that it has a well on it, and a well is a direct conduit into the aquifer. So we encourage people to cap them or plug them. Plug them can be costly. So we had this groundwater protection initiative campaign that we did years ago, and all the way from teaching people how to register their well, how to identify their well, well maintenance. And then we also did a video with a groundwater well driller, and he had been in the business for decades. Like, it's a generational thing that had passed down. So you kind of, when you talk about the emotional aspect of it, he was this cute little man. He wore these like very unique hats, like a polka dot red hat, if you can envision that. And so we had him sit down and talk about his business, how long he'd been in the business. In the back, 50 years ago, out west, wells were the only way that people could get water on their properties. And so you had to have these well drillers that were able to drill and understand the complex system underground, like the Edwards Aquifer versus the Trinity Aquifer, and tapping into the aquifer. And I don't even understand how they learned to do that kind of stuff. It's like a whole feat within itself, but kind of, and then the emotional pull too of like, asking the community, if you see something that could be an abandoned well, notifying us, working with different partners and entities within the cities, because we really strongly encourage people to plug and cap those wells, just because people can put things down them, trash, pollution can get into and somehow make its way into the aquifer. So it's kind of letting people know that, be a good aquifer steward, be a good Samaritan, and share that information with us so that we can protect our groundwater resource, which is very precious to not only our generation, but future generations, making sure they have clean water.
I love how passionate you are about taking these stories and making them real for audiences on social media, for example. Can you talk a little bit about the role of passion and eliciting passion from your subjects as you interview them or coach them or have them share their stories on social media?
Yes. So traditionally, that was like a part of our campaign. Traditionally, we have like our staff, and they're so very passionate about what they do. So for example, like our field research park is where we're doing that cutting edge research. We're studying evapotranspiration. We're studying these different land management practices, and we're kind of trying to bring back the landscape to its natural state, something to which maybe it looked like, 100 years ago, and but also implementing these different types of cutting edge research there. So something that I can draw on, and I work closely with him. I actually host a podcast series called the Recharge Zone Podcast, and Brent is my co-host, and he's also my mentor. He is very intelligent. He kind of knows a lot about the system itself. He has an education background as well as like a geologist and a scientist background. So he knows how to kind of engage and educate the public. And so some videos that we've done with him, you can just, it's like, you want the people who truly enjoy what they do talking about the subject matter and communicating, because that comes across like that natural ability to communicate something in a way that seems authentic and real. Because you could train someone who's like, I don't want to be on camera. I don't really like this, but I'm doing this because it's a part of my job. Well, like that will come across, in a certain way on camera. So the authenticity of what people want to do and want to talk about. So Brent has been someone who has been able to communicate those things to people in a way that they understand. And the proof is in the numbers. We also have the executive director of Aquifer Science, Mark. He tends to do very well when we put those videos out there. He kind of has a country twang to him, and he seems like a very wise man. So it's proven that like whenever we put their types of videos out there, they get strong likes and strong engagement.
It's wonderful to have a great bench, isn't it? I know that some PR practitioners, our future PR practitioners, might be hearing your bench and thinking, oh, I want a bench like that. What are some elements of a successful public relations plan that will then lead to a successful execution later?
So I would say, some of the things that you can do are, sitting down, having those strategic meetings with people, identifying the avenues in which you're going to communicate. So if it's going to be a fully, digital campaign, or if it's going to be something that's dynamic where you're doing traditional media, and then you're also doing videos, like you're kind of working in the various different avenues to communicate what you're trying to convey to people. So I think establishing those types of things and what the overarching theme is, of course, is something that's important. And then identifying your goals that you want to achieve. So it's like, do we want to, for example, on social, it's like, do we want to increase followers by 10% in the first 2 quarters of the year? Or do we want to increase engagement on social by this percentage or whatnot? In specific to social too, I would say if you're running a social media campaign, are you doing paid advertisements on social, and the duration in which those are going to run, what your achievable measures are? Are you trying to get more engagement, more views, more likes? Those are some of the things that I can think of. And then also too, for when it comes to campaigns, it's like, having the content that you need. So it's like fact sheets, ensuring that you have, accurate information, fact sheets, photos, videography that you can pull for different things, graphic elements, infographics, and things of that sort. And for me, it's working with my team. I wear many hats. So most of the time I'm trying to do multiple things and call on multiple people on my team to help in those different ways. But those are the things that I can kind of think of when it comes to preparing for a campaign, and obviously vetting it through the appropriate channels. Like, it's not like I can just come up with something at the top of my mind and just be like, okay, like I'm going to start implementing and executing. It's like, well, no, I need buy-in from my boss. I need buy-in from the other executive directors and ultimately from the general manager that at our agency. So those types of things.
So many different parts of that plan, from strategies and tactics to objectives, and making sure that it's all aligned with your goals and what you actually want to do. What do you think is the most challenging part of that planning process? I mean, you have this giant plan with all these moving pieces. It's a lot to keep in mind for anyone who's writing a document like that.
Yes. I would say something I have so many things on my desktop. Like I have notes for meetings and I will organize things as such. So it's like I will organize a folder, for example. We have something coming up where we're going to be talking about native plants. So it's going to be this kind of campaign that we're going to be pushing out there and putting out there. And we kind of started it already this year. We have a native plant calendar. So anyways, what I'll do is I will organize notes by meetings, and then it's a lot of like organizing, coordinating, sharing those notes with the appropriate people that were part of those meetings, and then kind of just, I would say it takes a lot of organizing. It takes a lot of like, scratch that idea from this meeting, and now this is the final revised version of, this is the 2.0 or the 4.0 version of what you initially had. It's just really refining and keeping track of those things. And what I've also noticed that has been proven to be helpful is, when you keep track of those things and you keep track of like, so-and-so said this works, so-and-so said this doesn't work, and then we're moving forward in this way, you can't argue with that because it's like everyone was there, everyone was present. People know who has the final say in what can go and what can't go. So that also helps because you have your different levels of things that you have to pass through, especially for my agency. It has to be vetted through a channel. And so I'm ensuring that more than just an email, it's meeting with those people, it's having conversations and communicating with them time and time again.
Buy-in, right? You have all these people who have to sign off. I like how you described how you had to make a note. So-and-so approved this, because then it's irrefutable, right? You definitely got that buy-in. Can you give advice to people who are struggling with getting buy-in from leadership, and maybe how you go about getting that buy-in? I know relationships are important, but what else? What else do we need to really get that buy-in whenever we're struggling to make a change that's positive for our public relations campaign?
Yes, I would say using reputable sources when you're trying to pitch, like it's like you're doing internal pitching essentially when you're kind of trying to start this new campaign or get it off the ground. And so using reputable sources, I found that has been helpful time and time again. Because, a lot of us, when you kind of get out into the PR world and you're in the thick of it, some people are not doing continuous education and they're not doing things to learn about the current kind of, they don't have a pulse on what's currently going on or current news, current ways to communicate or different types of things, different types of avenues in which you can communicate. So I always like to kind of include facts from different sources that I can kind of call on, and that has been proven helpful because then like you kind of can't argue with that. You're like, well, it's out there, it's something that's been successful, it's a model that's been used, and look at how far its reach has gone. And so I think having reputable sources when you're doing something and when you're doing that internal pitching, and really having as much information as you can. It's obviously like you don't want to information overload. So having prepped and having kind of a good idea of how you even want to communicate it to people, because if it seems too complex and it seems too busy, then you could lose someone. Even though it was a good idea, you could lose someone. So I think it's like having those concise points of information that you're trying to achieve and you're trying to communicate is how you get buy-in from internal buy-in. And then I would also say too, understanding the internal strategic plan. So it's like, if you can model something that mimics what your agency is trying to do internally, and it supports that, you will get more buy-in than maybe something that's totally in the opposite direction, not even covering some of the strategic plan that your agency has. So to me, it's things like that.
So tying what you're doing in with the larger business goals.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And between the planning and the buy-in and the execution, what goes wrong? Because there's all sorts of things that I imagine could go wrong between
Yes.
we have the perfect plan, we've got it approved, and now it's time to execute. What's the what's the harms there that sometimes come up?
I think sometimes it's trying to do too much. Like, we have, everyone has ambitious goals. When you sit down with a bunch of people and you're trying to think things through, and you have certain campaigns, it's like, as much as you want it to happen in a certain time frame, I think it's being flexible with what you can realistically achieve and do. Because it's like, along with the plan, you have your day in and day out work. Like, for example, for me, it's like, I'm reconciling transactions, or I'm ensuring that social media posts are going out on time, and I'm looking at analytics, and I'm taking care of, media inquiries that are coming in. But then I'm also like, okay, well, I need to remember, I need to sit down with that person and kind of discuss this aspect of a campaign. So I also think allowing a certain amount of time, like the time frame with which you're developing a campaign, being realistic with what you can achieve in a year. Because I'm like, we live in a society where it's like, do it all, be it all, get it all done, and like, that can be a lot. That can be a lot for someone.
Hustle has burnout. The hustle culture we know has
Yes.
burnout, and it leads to all sorts of outcomes that maybe aren't as positive. We want to hustle. We just want to hustle to the point
Yes.
that it hurts things, right? So it
Yes.
sounds like you're juggling a lot every single time, right? So you have a campaign, you have the planning, you have so many balls in the air. I wonder the challenges of having so many different people on the same page, the challenges of having so many different wheels in motion. Managing that must be a challenge. How do you manage that? Is that a great Slack channel, a great Teams channel? How do you get everyone on the same page and know what we're working on at every phase?
I would say it's the tendency to not work in a silo. So I feel like, it's easier to, like, especially like on your teams, it's easier to be like, okay, I'm going to go back into my corner and do the things that I need to do to accomplish the goals that I have set for myself. But like, for our team, we meet every Monday, and sometimes we have like 3-hour meetings where we're discussing current weekly things, also discussing big picture. I have an open line of communication with my boss. I will text him, I will call him, I will Teams him. And then I have an open line with my general manager and deputy general manager. So I'm in my team too. Like, I'm communicating in all the ways, and sometimes it's a lot, but it's like, sometimes for me, especially in my job, I need immediate answers. I need to know, like, is this a go, or is this not a go? And so having those open channels of communication, and knowing that you're working as a team and you're working together, has proven helpful. And it's just like, always, I'm just always we're email, like, we're always communicating with each other, and there's no delay in that communication either. It happens pretty instantaneously with our team.
Do you have any projects coming up that you're really excited about in public relations plannings and campaigns?
Yes. So one which I can think of, that I kind of mentioned earlier. So we have this News Drop magazine, and it's a way with which we communicate to people. And the reason why I kind of feel like it goes into campaigns, is I have to work internally with our staff, and we have editorial meetings. They write various stories on different campaigns that we're having. So we have a certain number of issues that go out every year, And the coming issue that we're focusing on is native plants. And we're kind of throwing it back to like the 70s. Like it has a whole theme to it and everything. But within that publication, we're having different stories that touch on why native plants are important, how they help the aquifer, and like native grasses too. People, tend to think of a luscious green, yard instead of xeriscaped and with native grasses and native plants. So that's something that I'm always excited for. It's a whole process within itself that's very time consuming, but it's a labor of love because it's like we have a digital version, then we have a print version that you can recall on. And it's fun for me to work one-on-one with our internal staff and help them write the stories, help capture content for it. It lets me get out in the field too and be a part of those processes of the photography and the videography. So that is what I'm looking forward to. Like I mentioned too, like the podcast episodes that we do and the podcast that I co-host with Brent. That's something I'm always interested in doing. And it meshes well with the News Drop magazine because some of the things that happen within the News Drop and the certain campaign that we're running within that issue will translate over to the podcast episode in which we're interviewing someone for. So those are the types of things that I'm most looking forward to. We also have another campaign that we're going to be rolling out where we go into the different counties within our jurisdiction, and we are getting testimonials from people. Who better to talk about your agency or the work that you've done than the customers that you've serviced. And so we're going to work on that. And that's something that will have legs that will kind of go on throughout the year and be a theme that we use. I don't feel like that can ever get old, and the ways in which we do that and the ways in which we communicate that are fun to think about, the different creative ways and avenues we get those testimonials from people.
Wonderful. And I wanted to know what your sources for wisdom are. I know you're creating a source of wisdom with your podcast for people who are interested in the Edwards Aquifer Authority. What are some sources of wisdom for public relations and professional development that you find yourself going back to?
I would say, I've been a part of the American Marketing Association. I've attended various PRSA events. I also I follow closely and use their resources. It's called Government Social Media. So they kind of talk about social media in relation to government agencies and what best practices and things to use. LinkedIn is always something that I like to look at. There's just various different resources you can use there. And then also something else that I like to do is, I do public relations and public affairs type work, but I also like to dabble in photography and videography. So like Adobe Premiere Pro and then, Photoshop and Illustrator and those types of things. So I make sure that I'm well versed in those things, and the work that I do allows me to use those resources so I don't lose those resources. And so just continuing to immerse yourself in the things with which you're using, I feel like make you a well-rounded public relations professional.
Such depth there in that answer. I appreciate that. What's one core skill or competency that you think that people should really work on in public relations to be a great practitioner?
I would say with patience one, I think patience, persistence, and flexibility. I think, you can plan all day. Like I was saying earlier, you can plan all day. You can have the best intentions in mind. But when people are involved, things might go awry, and things will probably go awry. And being able to be flexible and roll with it and pivot when you need to. I've learned that as I've been working at this agency from when I started to now, that, sometimes you have to pivot and go in a different direction. And it's like you're venturing into unknown territory, but it ends up being fruitful. And it ends up being something that would have been better than the original plan that you had proposed. So I think those types of things come into mind when I'm thinking about that.
Wonderful. I am also teaching a course on podcasting. So I'm extra excited to hear that you're a podcaster, and not only a podcaster, but you work with a co-host as well. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about the challenges and pitfalls and just the struggle that it is to be a podcaster?
Yes. And so, okay, so we started the podcast during the pandemic. Um, it was our line of communication. We focused on kind of communicating to people about the work that our agency does. So we would interview people from various different departments on things like at one point in time, it was the Edwards Aquifer Protection program. We've interviewed internally on the different species and these different cave dwelling species and what that means. And then we kind of have evolved and ventured out. There's something called the Precipitation Enhancement Program. So we interviewed someone who does the cloud seeding, and we actually do some of that work out west, which in turn helps, you know, it helps the aquifer, you know, get water when in times of drought and things like that. So um, those things prove they have their own little nuances within them. So it's like prepping people ahead of time. Ours is not a live podcast. Ours is pre-recorded. So I think that tends to give people a sigh of relief when they're like, okay, it's pre-recorded. There's a little bit of finessing and editing that can be done. And then two, sometimes you have people who are more long-winded. And so it's kind of knowing how to jump in there and switch the subject so that you can move on to your next question. So it's not like a 2.5 hour podcast episode. And Brent, I probably am the more I represent the general public and Brent represents the expert. So we kind of bounce ideas off of each other and we work really well together. Because sometimes there will be like scientific terms that are thrown out there. And I'm like, Brent, can you clarify what so-and-so said? Because that's not something that, people will understand. So, I would say those types of things. And I think too, all the experiences I've had, I love storytelling. Like it's something that is so fascinating to me. And when you sit down with someone one-on-one in a podcast episode, you have the debrief kind of, afterwards, but you also work ahead of time to kind of, get them prepared for the episode. And those have always been great conversations that we've had with people. It eases their minds. And then when we jump into the episode, I feel like I learned so much about them. And it's been so insightful for me. So for example, at the beginning of last year, he is our internal lawyer. And he was here when the EAA Act was established. So he takes us back and he's like explaining all of the intricacies that went into it and, telling us all the stories. And I'm just like, this is like history. Like I'm sitting down with someone who will probably go down in history for being a part of establishing the EAA Act. So it's also fun because I'm like, I don't know, it makes me so excited because I'm like, these are things that need to be told. These are things that if someone doesn't tell their story, the story goes with them. So it's like, it helps it live on in perpetuity,
Yeah, podcasting is such a great medium for storytelling and getting the message out. And it sounds like you've got a great rapport. You've got a great pre-interview strategy. You've got a great follow-up, I'm sure. In the actual podcast recording itself, are there any pitfalls or challenges that come up more often than not?
Oh yeah. Like when we first started, we were, so kind of going back to the basis, like podcast hosting. So like finding a hosting platform to use, I use Libsyn, and that within itself is like learning something new. I've always liked videography and those types of things. So it kind of became natural. I do the producing, the editing, from making the graphic element that accompanies the icon for the podcast episode. I get to use my creative flair and do all that. So it's I enjoy it so much. But I would say with the recording, when we first started, we were just relying on computer audio, and I'm very amateur today because that's what I'm doing. We're relying on my computer, but we now have a soundboard. We have all the tools that we need to make it like, sound crisp and good. And I also think too, it makes you more official, when someone's coming in and doing the podcast episode with you, you have all the equipment, and then it's prepping them ahead of time, like, be so close to the microphone, try not to like hit things or bounce things off of it, because then the sound will come through. It's those types of things. And I think everyone who's been on the podcast that we featured, they leave it and they're excited, like it's an adrenaline rush, right? And then I always feel excited to share it with them, because I'm like, this is you. Like we're the vessel with which you were able to talk about your area of expertise or tell your story. And like, here you go, like this is what you did. And to me, it's very rewarding, because like, for example, going back to the story of the EAA Act, like it's something that most people haven't had the opportunity to do. And they haven't really had an avenue to have those discussions and conversations. So to me, I also hope that they leave the podcast feeling a sense of accomplishment and, like they've made a difference.
Awesome. And you're making a huge difference in your efforts of podcasting. This is one of the things I love about Medium, right? When you're podcasting and you're feeling that success and that momentum and that passion for storytelling, how did you get there? What are the things that it took to get to that moment of the big win in podcasting?
I would say that in terms of like subject matter and things of that nature, like I've listened to podcasts over the years, and to be honest, I'm not like those people that listen to them all the time. I will listen to podcasts like when I'm working out or doing things like that. But I think to me, what kind of gets you to those aha moments of doing podcasting is like you're unveiling certain things that even in the preparing for the episode, they're not being showcased. And so like you're having those authentic conversations and kind of going back and forth when you're doing the episode, and it's revealing something that maybe wasn't there, that like a different avenue you can go down or ask questions that you didn't even plan to ask the questions, and then they just come organically and naturally. That's something that I've always also think that it's been helpful in some of the more successful podcast episodes that we've done.
I love that chase after authenticity, right? Because I used to start with like a question list, and now I've switched to topics, and I feel like there's such a better conversation with topics versus a set of questions. Have you found that, yes. Or do you go in with the topic list as well, or how do you approach the conversation to make sure it's meaningful?
Yes. So to ease the minds of the people who have been featured on the podcast, we will start with like just some very overarching questions. Normally it's like 5 questions, a very generic, like, what do you do? Can you give us a snapshot of what a day in the life looks like for this? Or, how did you go into this field, or things like that? And then from there, I think it eases their minds on the onset, because like, for example, I'll send meeting invites out, like Zoom meeting invites, to talk about it beforehand. And then the calendar invite for the day has the question, and it's like, hey, just to let you know, this is the format in which we're going to do things. These are the general questions we're going to ask you. And then when we get in the room with them and we're sitting down with them, we kind of go over it, ease their minds a little bit again. And then we jump into the questions, but then they are more comfortable and they're more willing to answer the additional questions, because then it just becomes conversational. And the conversational ones are always the ones that do better, and they just sound better too. So that's what's been helpful.
And it sounds like you're using a lot of your public relations relationship building skill set in your podcasting. It's all so connected, isn't it?
Yes. And I, shout out to you, because you were my professor, and I think a lot of you, I could tell how passionate you were. You were one of my favorite professors. So I learned so much from you. And I remember you had a storytelling, I think you had was it a group or an organization?
Yeah, the storytellers at UTSA and the Story Slam, the annual competition where students tell stories.
That's awesome. And so to me, that has always been inspirational to me. I I can name like a few professors at UTSA that have really made an impact, and you were one of the professors. And so to me, storytelling has always been something that I enjoy. It's I feel like it's something, it's a way to learn about a subject or learn about a person. That's not just, learn about people, is to hear their stories, and it's pulls at the heartstrings. It's the emotional aspect of people.
And resonates with more people, right? Because we're human beings who evolved to tell stories, and
Yes.
it has greater reach and impact, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes.
I love that. I love how this all connects so beautifully. And I, again, so appreciate your remembrance of our time in university. Where can people find you online if they wanted to know more or get in contact with you?
I would say and this is probably different from most people. I would say the way that you can get connected with me would be LinkedIn. You can look for me, Ann-Margaret Gonzalez. I'm not an influencing person, so like my social media handles and things are private, and they're just like family kind of oriented things. For me, I get fulfillment through like the work that I do and using those avenues to communicate. And as much as I enjoy social media in my personal life, I also have to find a balance. And so I have a young daughter too. So to me, I'm like, the balance is that I'm in it and I do it personally, but more professionally is where you will see me.
And I'm sure that's how people would want to reach out to through LinkedIn. It sounds like is the best place to find you.
Yes, or email, honestly, too, even, so email agonzalez@edwardsaquifer.org. You can also, I hope you listen to our podcast. It's the Recharge Zone podcast, and I encourage people to send questions. So, like, your podcasting students, if they tune in and they have any questions, we're more than willing to answer them.
Yeah, the Recharge Zone podcast is, a great flagship for Edwards Aquifer. And being a part of that, it's a great place to find you. Whenever you're doing the show notes, because we're going to make sure we have that podcast in our show notes. When you're doing the show notes for your podcast, do you have any advice for creating really great show notes that'll help you get noticed by search engines and things like that?
I don't really do that. I will, like, when I'm writing the the title for the show, and then the kind of the synopsis of the show, those are the things that I mainly focus on. And then sometimes we'll put paid boosts behind it on social. We also have an e-blast that we send out it kind of encompasses a lot of constituents and stakeholders within our agency. It's something that we've aggregated over time. So we have like thousands of people that we e-blast it to. And it's always nice because like I'll get messages back like, oh, listen to the podcast. This is really cool. I didn't know that. Like, we get those really sentimental, nice messages back. So I'm like, someone's listening to it.
and building relationships with your organization. As you said, you spend less time on your own social media because you believe in the organization you're working for, and you're able to put those skills to such good use for the Edwards Aquifer. Such a fun conversation. Ann-Margaret Gonzalez, thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate your wisdom and insights today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this thoroughly, and I'm like, I look forward to seeing it, and I look forward to, helping your students in any way. So feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you.